Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me tonight. I hope that was fun. We got real close to the end. Like, very close, but I don't know how to kill that guy and then get back out. It seemed like it seemed very hard. Okay, a couple of questions. Very good ones. Jason did not ask about how to implement asymmetrical co-op gameplay in Hitman. But I'm gonna treat it as though he did. I'm glad that you specified co-op, because when you talk about asymmetric multiplayer in a game like this, the thing that comes to mind, sort of obviously, is the asymmetrical Assassin's Creed, right? That was essentially one player. I think the way that worked was one versus several. So one player is the assassin, or like an assassin character, and everybody else is a normal character, and the assassin character is disguised as a normal character, but is not computer controlled. And so your opponent or opponents are basically just trying to tell, like, which of the many, amongst the many NPCs, which identical character is not controlled by a computer, and find you out. Co-op is more interesting. That was very cool. That was a very cool thing. A very interesting, like, neat idea, and I'm glad that Assassin's Creed did it, but Assassin's Creed did it. Asymmetrical co-op in a game like this is much more interesting. I think I know exactly how I would do it. It would be like this. This game does a lot, and tries really hard to sort of make it fit diegetically within the narrative of the moment of the game, to let you know what the fuck is going on. So when like you are caught, or when somebody witnesses you and reports you to the authorities, the conversations are, like, very clear, and they're played, sort of regardless of where they take place. They're played very clearly to you so that you can tell, like, what's going on. I've been compromised. There's, like, a little thing on the bottom that says, like, whether you're compromised or hunted or whatever. There's quite a bit that has to... Oh, and then... So there's quite a bit that has to do with, like... how aware is everybody of me in the outfit that I'm currently wearing. And then specifically, I'm using assassin vision, like, all the time, to see where there are guards and what guards are, like, aware of me and which ones would, like, recognize me, and, like, all of that stuff. All of this contextual information that is vitally important to being able to effectively move through the world, I'd take all that away. And then I would give you a second player that plays like a spy drone or something, who's what was the line from Spider-Man Homecoming? The guy in the van, the guy at the computer, the guy at the desk. Well, I can't remember what it is, but, like, player 2 plays as the Hitman's extrasensory perception. So you can fly through the space, you can get, like, an overhead view, you get Hitman vision, you can see where all of the guys are, you can tell which guys are suspicious of this outfit. You are monitoring the sort of radio band and can tell sort of all of that contextual information, like how when a body is found, all of that stuff. And the game is, can you communicate that information to the Hitman player, to Agent 47, as well as the game currently does it? In order to, and some of this might need to, like, this would be subject to playtesting. Like, I don't know that you could do all of the spatial relationship stuff, but maybe you could, maybe Agent 47 does have see-through walls, see where characters are, and you can, like, tag them, or they show up as different colors so that you can identify them to the other player. So you can say, like, you know, the guy who's outlined in blue, he will notice you. Like, he will be suspicious of you if you get too close to him. But the game is about that, like, coordinated information exchange. I think that'd be really cool. That's my co-op game. That's what I do for co-op. The problem with this, and this is kind of like perennially my problem with co-op designs, is that there's probably not enough for that second player to do. That second player probably needs some, like, physical input, and it might involve, like, jamming radio signals, or like somehow creating distractions through electronics or something. You might redesign the levels a little bit so that there's more of that stuff, and it's more necessary for a second player to do that. I tend to like, when I'm just throwing stuff against the wall like this, I tend to come up with designs that are really overly reliant on this idea of communication and information exchange, where the sort of, like, physical activity rests on one player more than the other, and that can be that level of asymmetry can be disconcerting sometimes, because there's not just an asymmetry in what you're doing, but in, like, the how you are engaging, and sometimes that works and it's fine. In, like, Super Mario Odyssey, right? The multiplayer, the co-op of Super Mario Odyssey is one player plays as Mario and the other player plays as Cappy, and if you have the right dynamic between players, that works really well. Like, that can work really well. But one player is playing, like, a lot more actively than the other player, and one player is much more constrained in the kind of action that they can do and the level of interactivity that they have. And that is not always, like, what two people are looking for. And similarly, I think if, like, one player is all stealth and action and moving around and making decisions, and the other player is all communicating information, then there's an unevenness there that could be problematic. Don't know. It'd be interesting to see. All right. There was another question up here. So this is interesting. The degree to which this game takes itself seriously. Create a Beast and Cage Tiger we're talking about. How aware it is of its own ridiculousness. Okay, so first of all, are those dipolar? Just to set our ground here, can the game take itself seriously and also be aware of its own ridiculousness, or is that an oxymoron? it does seem like those two things are pretty far apart, because if it is in any sense ridiculous, then it's, how does it take itself seriously from there, starting from that supposition. Here's the thing that I'm thinking, and why I'm trying to reconcile these two things, is that I think the game is fundamentally ridiculous, and it is aware of its own ridiculousness. That is where a lot of the fun of the game comes from. I really believe, like, you can achievement hunt and speed run. Well, I mean, not the achievement hunt, let's set aside. But you can, like, speed run this game. You can go for precision. You can go for stealth. You can try to hunt a high level of achievement. You can mastery hunt this game, right? But I don't think that that's how most people play it. I don't think that's really how it's designed to be played. I think it's trying to, I think it does try to allow that kind of interaction, but I think that it is much more comfortable with play that is in a more ridiculous space. That is sort of an exploration of the limits of the system. It's got this complex system that it presents to you, and it encourages you to push the limits of it. And that is going to result in ridiculous behaviors. So I do think that fundamentally this is a game that is aware of its own ridiculousness and tries to capture that, and that is where the fun of the game fundamentally comes from. I think that ridiculousness in some part comes from the degree to which the game takes itself seriously and too seriously. It comes from the sort of the play of these tropes, the sort of like stealthy, the very Bond-like character, right? Like, when we get down to it, more than anything else, this is a game that's inspired by classic James Bond. And the classic James Bond, where Bond would, like, dress up in outfits in order to maneuver through space undetected. Not like all the time, like happens in Hitman, and not always like in a way that we would consider super effective. Often in ways that was sort of like either more subdued than this, or played for comedic effect. But like that's the kind of thing that would happen in classic Bond, in the sort of like pre-modern Bond era that was less gritty, less about sort of a gritty approach to realism or veneer of realism, that was a more sort of like how do I even want to describe this? It's sort of like a classy Goofy, right? Traditional comedic Bond is playing in this space of like, here are the tropes of sophisticated, let's go with that, the tropes of sort of sophisticated storytelling and movie making, but premises that are ridiculous on their face, and a lot of like jokiness and snarkiness and lightness, just like a lot of lightness, that is contrasted with, big plots, big stakes, big explosions, murders, and villains, and And sometimes like snidely whiplash villains, but sometimes like really kind of terrifying villains. And there is a particular humor, there's a particular sort of like ridiculous farceness that exists, I think, at that intersection, right, of Jaws, the giant guy with the metal mouth, who would literally just eat anything, and was sort of terrifying, and an Odd Job, who was much more like a much goofier kind of a villain, right? But the two of them would show up together, like that juxtaposition existed in the movies. You got these cool cars and beautiful women, and then also and like high technology, right? Spy gadgets, and then also these like ridiculous one-liners. And this is not classic Bond, but there's actually a scene in, I'm pretty sure it was Spectre, like one of the most recent Bond movies, where the classic style Bond opening ends with Daniel Craig falling off of a roof and landing on a couch that just happens to be sitting like in the street, like perfectly positioned to catch him, and he just sort of like lands sitting on the couch and then gets up and dusts himself off and walks away. And that's the end of the chase sequence. And it's like, that's so goofy. That's so ridiculous. It's so like seemingly out of step from the other things that are going on. And in some ways it feels especially weird in a Daniel Craig movie, because Daniel Craig is not like glossy, classy, or it plays less as the like glossy, classy, high archetypes of sophisticated spy literature, and more of this sort of like modern gritty action, blood and dirt, on fancy suits, like kind of a style that juxtaposition is a little bit different. But there's still, like, I think part of what that movie is doing in that scene is recalling this thing that was done constantly in these classic movies, of playing in that seam of sort of like this serious and sophisticated ideas or symbols, not even really ideas, but just like the symbols of sincere sophistication, the appearance of that, and then this sort of like very different sensibility that comes out through the action of the movie that is much more almost clownish, and where those things abut, where they bump up into each other, there's something that's really ironic or farcical. There is a particular style of humor and experience, and I think that Hitman is 100% all about that. It is capturing that moment in a Bond movie. It's trying to sort of recreate that sense of, this is a dangerous world, full of intricate plots and bad guys and political intrigue and dastardly murder, and also, like, you can dress up in a clown outfit if you want, because like that's what it's actually like to play the game. It's clown shoes all the time. It ends up being like crazy goofy shit, and that, like, that is where it is playing. It's playing in that juxtaposition. So if it's possible for it to do both, I think it's doing both. I think it's taking itself seriously in a in maybe a not entirely sincere way, right? It's not sincere about its seriousness. It's seriousness for comedic effect, in order to heighten that ridiculousness. Okay. What's this? Story quest. With the game having such large maps, how well do you think the game makes use of all this extra space? It seems like a lot of it is just fluff to run through. It's interesting, because I certainly get where that idea is coming from, and it's accurate. Like, some of this space definitely feels fluffy. Sometimes more than other times. Tonight was really interesting because we actually managed to follow through on a couple of those whatever they call them, opportunities, I think they call them. So opportunities can pay out really big, it seems like. That masseuse thing, like, was a little bit tricky to get, although it seems like it was one of the easier ones. I guess the key was actually, like, pretty easy once you sort of got down to it. Like, both of those, there was some level of, this is kind of tricky to do, but once you do it, it pays off big time. And my sense is that I have no fucking clue how to do the poster guy, the propaganda dude, that we followed around for like a half hour. I don't know how to really do that effectively, because he never seems to go anywhere where there aren't people around. But if you could do that, that seems like it would pay off in a big way. It would give you a different kind of access to that facility that would be really useful. So, what was the question? The question was about big maps and spaces. That's right. So, one of the things that I think all of that, like, semi-empty space that's around is seeding opportunities like that. Either just having sort of like a place for you to explore and discover that, like, here's a guy who's talking about how his dad has a master key to the school. Cool. Or, like, found that in the middle of nowhere. Or, I want to steal this guy's outfit. I got to tail him through these sort of, like, crowded different spaces looking for an opportunity to take him out. That's interesting. It's more interesting if it leads somewhere. This level, I felt like, was really, really, really tricky, because so much of that space is so crowded. Like, in the last level, similarly, you start outside of a compound. You start outside of a place that you're trying to get into. And inside, there are guards and there are, like, servants or whatever, people who will be on the lookout for you. But outside is just, like, tourists. It's just like a town. This being a much more crowded town, right? In the previous town, there were lots of areas where it was reasonable to have people of interest wander into that were not necessarily, like, completely hidden away, but were unobserved, at least if you got the timing right, Whereas it really felt like in this area, even the places that were relatively unobserved, there were a lot of people wandering through them. It was, like, really hard to try to time something so that there wouldn't be anybody there to see what you were doing for long enough to do anything of consequence. And in general, I think like in the previous levels, we have seen those spaces be pretty effectively used. Like those were spaces that people could sort of travel through to areas that were interesting, where interesting is measured by like your ability or your opportunity to use that area to subdue somebody or hide a body or do something like that. This level, it seemed much harder. At least it was much harder for me to find those opportunities. But on the other hand, and actually, no, not on the other hand, I guess on the same hand, like once I started exploring the marketplace and those back alleys and things, there were a lot of corners and little rooms that had places to dump bodies and things like that, like useful architecture, but they were sort of like rooms that were just immediately off of the streets in a way that I have a hard time imagining the scenario where I could subdue somebody in the street there and take them into a back room without being seen. And there are not strong mechanics, or at least I am not aware and good enough at the mechanics for like luring somebody off of the beaten path. And that's what it felt like this level really needed. Like I really wanted my coins to be much more effective in this level, to say like, well, yeah, it's crowded and I can't really do anything out here, but there are these little corners that if I can lure somebody into a corner, then I could do something. And so all of this space would then become interesting space, in that I'm trying to find like, how do I engineer a situation where I can lure somebody off of the beaten path. I just, and again, like I've been playing Horizon, which has mechanics that are much more effective, that make you much more effective at that, right? Like that much more of the game is about that than Hitman. And I'm maybe still in that kind of headspace where that's a thing that I want, that this game is not about. Yeah. I feel like that is another thing that makes those spaces interesting, is or potentially interesting, is this idea that like they are spaces that contain potential opportunities. I just had a much harder time tonight finding and exploiting those opportunities, and I feel like in previous levels that has been something that I've been able to take advantage of better. So I don't know whether to put that sort of on the level design or the difficulty rating, or just like my own subjective approach to the game. There's some kind of a disconnect where like other levels felt like that was smoother than this one. I think the thing you're thinking of was actually a symmetrical versus mode. All the fake NPCs were assassins with each other as targets. Holy shit, is that right? I think you're right. I think you are right. Which I had forgotten that that's the way that worked. Okay, so what am I thinking of other than Spy Party? Is there anything else that has implemented these mechanics? This is a very like Spy Party sort of a thing where because that's the other way you could go with asymmetrical multiplayer for Hitman, is I think less one player is a bad guy character, although maybe and more one player is in some form in like real-time strategy or hopping from body to body or like coordinating over the radio. One player plays one side, plays essentially like all the NPCs on the map, and the other player is the assassin. And the information that the target player receives is based on sort of like how much the assassin fucks up. So you can either like you can either be a soldier who runs out to try to like find the assassin, or you can send soldiers to a particular location, but you're only aware of the hitman if the hitman gets spotted or gets caught, or like you can discover bodies and you try to deduce based on where the bodies are, like what is the hitman's approach, and like how do I spot him and stop him. I think that's the sort of like asymmetrical competitive, and that could be really interesting depending on like I have a lot of questions about how that plays out on the target side, because I don't know if you get to just be any bad guy. Maybe you do, and the downside to like being a soldier or like somebody in a crowd is that you're taking your eye off the target, and you set yourself up in a safe room, but if you are like off being a guard searching for hitman and he gets into the safe room, then he's got a clean access to, like, you can't defend yourself, right? I think there's potentially something interesting in that. Yeah, so Splinter Cell had an asymmetrical team competitive that was also very good. And then was there another one that had an interesting mode? Maybe it was just those two. We have seen sort of like interesting attempts at making multiplayer modes that build off of the IP and experience goals, the sort of like core experiences of a game, but like are novel in their execution of the mechanics of a game in order to really do something interesting in a multiplayer space. So we've seen that like at least a couple of times, and I don't know how much we will continue to see that. BioWare has also done that, right? Like BioWare has tried to create in their Mass Effect multiplayer, like here is something that originates from, is built on, is based on, and harkens back to the experience of playing the single player story campaign, but it is not that. It is sort of like very distinct from that in ways that allow it to be multiplayer. Sorry, I'm scrolling back up through the chat for is there from Panda MMC, who I keep wanting to call Pandemic. Apologies. Panda MMC, is there any character in Hitman that you interact with dialogue, or a main storyline / main characters? Yes. So the woman who does this voiceover at the start of the mission, and actually like occasionally in the middle of the mission, which seems sort of new. I don't feel like she did that as much in previous levels, but maybe I'm just not remembering it. But at the beginning of the level, she absolutely, like, you know, here's your mission and here's your target, and like she was the person who was like, that's the head of security guy. At the beginning of the game, there is a cutscene where you interact with her directly, and speak with her and have a voice, which was not bizarre to me at the time, because this is my first Hitman game, and I don't know everything about the franchise and the property. But now that I'm a few levels into it, is super weird, because it sure as heck feels like Agent 47 does not speak in pretty deliberate terms. Like, he never speaks throughout the rest of the game. And so having a cutscene at the beginning where he was just chatting it up with this lady, in retrospect, seems really weird, because he doesn't speak so much that I get the sense that he, like, never speaks or can't speak, or just, you know, that's his thing. He's got an affectation where he doesn't talk. But apparently not. Apparently it's just, like, in the levels, he never speaks. Which is a little weird. It seems a little weirder to me. But yes, there is an overarching story. I don't understand it much more than the specific story, which is apparently entirely unrelated, of this, like, rebellion and the political intrigue behind it. But there is an overarching story about I mean, I don't even know. This woman who works for an organization that I find myself working for not really any reason, and there is another assassin who keeps assassinating people who are sort of related to the things, to, like, my missions, but not in a way that, like, has an obvious meaning to me, or that I've been able to, like, keep track of and string together. But his assassinations are extremely personal. Like, he's in this for vengeance or justice or something. Like, I don't really know. I don't know who he is or why he's doing what he's doing, but he's not, like, just doing it for a paycheck like I guess I am. He's doing it for some, like, reason. And presumably, over the course of the game, like, the two of us are going to be brought head to head. That probably means it's not a great story. Well, so is it a great story on its own? Like, does the story stand alone in some kind of a greatness? No, it does not. It is not a great story because I mostly don't know what's going on, and even where I sort of understand who the characters are, I don't really understand their motivations. Like, that's not a great story. Let's talk about it in the context of a game, though. What is the purpose that the story serves in the overall experience of this game? Is this a game that has on its agenda anywhere to deliver a great narrative experience? I would argue that it is not. And, you know, this level and the conversation that we had, you know, at the beginning of this is kind of a microcosm, I think, for the whole game, where the narrative is designed to serve a particular experiential purpose, to set a stage, to frame the gameplay in a certain way. And the structure of it, and the terms of it, the themes of it, the actions of it, all of those are intended to serve specific purposes for essentially like just as framing for the play experience of each of the levels of the game as a whole. The story is not designed to be a great story that is memorable. The story is designed to sort of create this larger sense that, number one, there is some connective tissue. There is some reason why you are doing these things. This is not just literally a bunch of levels that are like, you know, placed one after another. That you have some sort of terms of employment, and you are taking missions from a consistent source for a consistent purpose, even if you don't know or have any kind of say or bring any significance to what that purpose is. So to give it sort of a sense of coherence. And then secondly, to give you this sense of like intrigue that, again, as this is a story about the sort of like the spyness of being a spy, the disguises and the stealth and the inserting yourself into situations that you're not supposed to be in, the slipping between cracks or slipping through cracks in security systems and in social situations and in, you know, the technical limitations of the AI of the game. The framing of the whole thing is similarly like you are a piece of a puzzle and you can't see the whole puzzle, but you get a sense of the pieces that are connected and that there is a larger picture at play, and there are characters who are bad and you are one of them, and then there are characters who are worse. And it is clearly sort of setting up a confrontation between you and the people that you work for, who are not good people, but at least have some sort of code, and are driven by a sort of something impartial like economics, as opposed to like this character who's being set up as who's being portrayed, who's being built up as like almost a madman who is something much more chaotic. Like there is a sense, as kind of like weak as it is, that the things you do are not necessarily righteous. They're not justified, and they are clearly like they're instigated by interested, like financially interested parties. But your role is one of kind of like bringing a sort of order to the world. You remove people who are agents of chaos, who are doing even worse things. And you don't eliminate them like lawfully, and you don't eliminate them because what they're doing is bad. You eliminate them first and foremost because you're getting paid to do it. But you're also eliminating them in a way that, in a larger sense, feels like it is bringing more order to the world. That this is you're stopping leaks. You are like you are clamping down on broken pieces of a system, and that there are other people out there who are sowing chaos in a way that is different from you. All of this is problematic, right? All of this is like pretty super crazy from an ideological standpoint. But from a narrative standpoint, you can sort of see how it all comes together. You get to play as a bad guy. You get to do bad things and feel somewhat justified in doing it, because as bad as you are, the people around you who you are up against or will be up against are worse. And it is better for you to do the things that you're doing than to let them do the things that they want to do. Which is interesting. It's interesting from a sort of like a narrative and a rhetorical standpoint. Okay, I gotta wrap up. So last question from Creative Beast is, have I played Shadow Tactics, Blades of the Shogun, or the old game Tenchu Stealth Assassin? Tenchu sounds familiar. Is that the name of something else? Is that a common word that I'm just unfamiliar with? I don't believe that I have played either of those games. Tenchu Stealth Assassin for the original PlayStation. I did not have or ever really play games on the PlayStation. I had a PS2 in the era of the PS3. But I never had a PlayStation. And then Shadow Tactics Blade of the Shogun is on Steam. This looks like it's an RTS. It's kind of an overhead isometric sort of a view, but it might actually be a I'm gonna have to look at gameplay videos. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful game, just visually. It looks really, really nice. Very colorful, which I appreciate, with really cool texture art, I think. Okay, so Zyvo mentioned Invisible Ink, which is a fucking awesome game. Creative Beast says more like real-time XCOM, and I'm assuming that this is Shadow Tactics is like a real-time XCOM. Yeah, that sounds real ow. I agree. I would be really, really bad at that game, but it looks cool. I will look into it on Steam because there's it's up on Steam, and learn more about it because I am not familiar with that game. That's very cool. Okay, I think that's it. I think that's all. I'm gonna go home and go to bed. Tomorrow is the start of thesis defense for the MFA students here at Interactive Media. So that is gonna be the rest of my week. Basically, should be a lot of fun. Actually, no, it like legitimately should be a lot of fun. Thesis defense is always really interesting. I'm not entirely disconnected from this class. I know a few of the master students, the grad students who will be graduating this year, and know what they have been up to. And then several more sort of I was there when they proposed their thesis projects, and have not seen what they've done in the intervening time. So it'll be really interesting to see tomorrow. And on Thursday, what they have been doing, and where they've gotten to. It should be really good. So I'm gonna have a fun week. Okay, I think that's it. Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks for hanging out. Really appreciate it. Had a lot of fun. This is fun because of you, and you're such a great community, and I really appreciate the stuff that you do, all of you, and being here and being good to each other, and being engaged and asking such interesting questions. Like, all of that is really, it means a lot to me, and makes this experience what it is. Thanks especially to everybody who has subscribed to the channel, or cheered You guys are heroes. You're wonderful, and thank you very much for doing that. I'm really grateful to you. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Check out all of the play-by-play stuff that goes on all the time. Come back on Thursday and hang out in secret chat. Secret, what do we call it? Alt chat. In the NDEF chat for Mostly Walking, and have a great couple of days between now and then. Yeah, I'll see you next week on Tuesday night again. Maybe playing more Hitman. I could probably play some more Hitman. I know there are other games that I want to play too, so eventually we're going to get to other stuff as well. But cool. Oh yeah, better chat. It's good. Better chat. Okay. Have a great night. Bye everybody.